On the morning of August 3rd, 2007, the day started off bright and sunny for Daniel Burrows, a 61-year-old resident of Mays Landing, New Jersey, along with his 45-year-old wife, Loretta, and other community members. Daniel and Loretta had been married for several years, but things took an unexpected turn that afternoon. Loretta spotted Daniel in the company of a blonde girl, driving a yellow Hummer with Florida license plates. Naturally, she was taken aback and confronted Daniel about the situation. To her shock, Daniel confessed that he was leaving her for the younger lady. Unfortunately, that was the last time anyone saw Daniel. Many questions soon arise. What happened to Daniel? Did he simply elope with the younger woman, or is there a more troubling reason behind his sudden change in behavior and subsequent disappearance? Mays Landing, located within Hamilton Township in Atlantic County, New Jersey, is an unincorporated community and census-designated place. According to the 2010 U.S. Census, the population of Mays Landing was recorded at 2,135 individuals. Notably, it serves as the county seat of Atlantic County, which is situated along the Jersey Shore. As of the 2020 census, Atlantic County ranks as the state's 15th most populous county. Mays Landing is renowned for the popular Baileys Winery, one of the largest wine producers in the state. The residents of this community are known for their easygoing and cheerful nature. In 2007, the crime rate in Mays Landing stood at 329 incidents per 100,000 people, significantly lower than the national average of 472. This is the very community where Daniel Burrows and his wife resided. Daniel Burrows, born on November 6, 1946 in Sheldon, Texas, was raised in the heart of Delaware County, Pennsylvania, alongside his sister, Jean Burrows Gallagher. Due to certain circumstances, they later moved to New Jersey, where his mother, Louise Florio Wontorsic, remarried Raymond J. Wontorsic. Daniel's half-brother, Raymond J. Wontorsic III, quickly became his closest companion. From a young age, Daniel displayed an extraordinary talent for craftsmanship, with his hands possessing a magical touch. His skills ranged from custom automotive paintwork to home construction. Although he did not have a conventional job, his knack for car repairs and renovations kept him occupied and satisfied. In 1960, Daniel attended high school, where he crossed paths with Loretta Doyle, his high school sweetheart. They experienced the highs and lows of teenage love, but their relationship was not particularly serious during that time. Unexpectedly, they went their separate ways after graduation and lost contact for many years. Both Daniel and Loretta moved on and married different individuals. However, they both went through divorces in 1970. Unfortunately, Loretta's second husband passed away in February 1994. Shortly after reconnecting, Loretta and Daniel's bond reignited, and they began dating once again. After 3 years of dating, the high school sweethearts decided to get married in 1997. They settled in Mays Landing, New Jersey, and everything seemed blissful. They blended their families, with children from their previous marriages, and Loretta even had 4 grandchildren. Daniel was a devoted father to his 2 children, Carolyn and Danny Jr., and a loving grandfather to Amanda Costa. However, their marriage was not as uncomplicated as it appeared. Over time, challenges arose beneath the surface of their seemingly smooth relationship. On August 3, 2007, Daniel mysteriously vanished from their home. Loretta recounted that Daniel had departed with a younger blonde woman in a yellow Hummer. As per her account, the woman was a waitress from Florida whom they had encountered during their vacation at a restaurant. Daniel developed a strong liking for the place, resulting in them dining there almost every day of their vacation. Upon their return home, Loretta embarked on another vacation with her daughter's family. Upon her return, she was taken aback to find Daniel in their driveway with the woman from Florida. While she was still trying to comprehend the situation, Daniel announced his intention to go to Florida, the Sunshine State, with her. Loretta insisted that Daniel had always desired to relocate and retire in Florida, a plan she opposed due to the proximity of her grandchildren. Their conflicting views on retirement plans strained their relationship. Following Daniel's sudden move, Loretta was devastated and sought revenge. She contemplated selling their house, but since the property was jointly owned by Daniel and Loretta, she could not do so without divorcing him. Instead, she organized a yard sale to dispose of Daniel's belongings. Unsurprisingly, this action infuriated and aroused suspicion among Daniel's friends and family. Robert Valiant Jr., Daniel's close friend, was perplexed as he knew Daniel cherished his tools for his projects, making it unusual for him to abandon them. Robert confronted Loretta about the yard sale and the abandoned tools, but Loretta asserted that Daniel had no interest in keeping his old belongings and did not wish to take them to Florida. Even Daniel's brother and best friend Raymond found the situation suspicious. Daniel had not shared his new address or informed him of his move to Florida, which they would typically discuss regularly. Daniel's sudden and unexpected departure left those close to him bewildered and concerned. They felt that the narrative did not align, yet they lacked evidence to contradict Loretta's account. However, they were determined to uncover the truth about Daniel's whereabouts and the identity of the mysterious girl who caused him to vanish without a trace. On September 1st, 2007, Raymond made the journey from his Pennsylvania home to visit Loretta and officially reported Daniel as missing to the police. The authorities immediately launched an investigation, focusing their search on local databases, particularly in Florida, where Daniel was rumored to have gone. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded no leads or traces of Daniel's whereabouts. Throughout the investigation, the detectives conducted interviews with Loretta, who remained cooperative and forthcoming. They also thoroughly searched her house and property, but found nothing suspicious or out of place. As they delved deeper into Loretta's background, the detectives stumbled upon a past embezzlement case. It came to light that Loretta had embezzled a substantial sum of money, approximately $500,000, from her previous workplace nearly a decade ago. This resulted in a 15-month federal prison sentence prior to her marriage to Daniel in 1997. When confronted with the evidence, Loretta claimed that she had been unfairly targeted by her company and that others were involved in the embezzlement as well. She admitted that she had kept this secret from Daniel out of fear. Surprisingly, it was revealed that Daniel had visited Loretta regularly during her time in prison, but she had not been entirely honest with him about the reason for her incarceration. Ronald Roberts, Daniel's friend and neighbor, also provided some concerning information to the investigators. He noticed dirt on Loretta's hands and clothing during their interactions and detected a foul odor, which she attributed to a dead animal. Additionally, he observed that a broken trellis had recently been repaired. Despite these suspicions, Loretta always had an explanation ready, frustratingly leaving the police without concrete evidence to make an arrest. As time passed, Daniel's case gradually grew colder, leaving his loved ones desperate for answers. In February 2009, Loretta took a significant step in her life by initiating divorce proceedings against Daniel. After enough time had passed, she believed it was justified to end their marriage and sell their house. To formalize the process, a notice was published in the newspaper. However, when the court hearing arrived, Daniel was nowhere to be found. Loretta's plan was to sell their house in Mays Landing and move to Ventnor City to be closer to her daughter and sister. In February 2010, Daniel Burrows' family successfully convinced investigators to reopen the case after the local police established a cold case unit in the county. The family also created a Facebook page called Find Daniel Burrows to gather information. In the page's About section, Raymond, Daniel's brother, expressed suspicion towards Loretta's claim that Daniel had left with another woman, leaving all his belongings behind. This raised doubts about Loretta's account of events. The case took an unexpected turn in February 2013 when Raymond, frustrated with the lack of progress, contacted the police. He believed that Loretta might be responsible for Daniel's disappearance and hinted that he might be deceased. Loretta was shocked by the accusations of her involvement in her husband's possible death. She maintained that Daniel had simply run away with a younger woman, but without concrete evidence to support either claim, the police were at a standstill. However, Raymond was determined to uncover the truth. He urged the detectives to investigate the suspicious death of Loretta's first husband. There were suspicions among both family members and friends that Loretta had played a role in his demise. The circumstances leading to his death were troubling. After a period of separation, Loretta and her former husband rekindled their relationship for about a week before tragedy struck, and he tragically overdosed. What deepened the suspicions even further was the fact that Loretta had been responsible for administering his medications during this period. Adding to the concerns, the police discovered that Loretta had received a substantial amount of money following his death. However, to everyone's surprise, she did not share any portion of it with his children. This raised red flags and strengthened the belief that something was amiss regarding the circumstances surrounding his death. Authorities began to suspect that Loretta's involvement went beyond what initially appeared. The similarities to Daniel's case only heightened their suspicions. However, despite their growing doubts, the police knew that without Daniel's body, they couldn't build a murder case. Nevertheless, they did stumble upon a potentially significant piece of evidence, a power of attorney document signed by Daniel. Upon closer examination, this document seemed suspiciously fake. It had been created on June 12, 2007, and had been legalized by an acquaintance of Loretta's, raising even more questions about the events surrounding Daniel's disappearance. It became evident that Loretta's primary motive was the valuable house, which was worth a substantial amount of money, and she was desperate to cash out. Investigators realized that there was more to this case than initially met the eye, and they were determined to uncover the truth about what had truly happened to Daniel. In the early morning of May 17, 2013, the investigators, led by Sergeant Lynn Doherty of the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office, obtained search warrants for both Loretta's house and the residence where she had been staying with her sister. The search warrants were executed simultaneously, leaving Loretta with no opportunity to tamper with or destroy any potential evidence. Loretta seemed to have an inkling as to why the police were there, as she anxiously inquired if they were planning to search her house in Ventnor City upon their arrival. Detective Caroline McDonald stumbled upon an eerie finding while scouring one of the bedrooms in Ventnor City. To her surprise, she discovered a collection of sizable Tupperware containers meticulously arranged and hidden within the closet. Curiously, these containers were the sole items in the house organized in such a manner. Adding to the peculiarity, air freshener beads and dryer sheets were placed atop these containers. However, the moment the containers were opened, a nauseating odor of decay permeated the air, sending shivers down their spines. To their utmost horror, investigators uncovered bones that had been painstakingly separated into two containers, along with a concealed skull nestled within a woman's handbag. Loretta was subsequently apprehended and brought in for interrogation at the police station. In a state of distress, she tearfully admitted to the murder of Daniel and disclosed that his remains were concealed within the closet of her Ventnor residence. However, Loretta presented a narrative of domestic violence, asserting that she had acted in self-defense. According to her account, a heated argument ensued between them, prompting her to retreat to the kitchen and retrieve a knife. Loretta alleged that Daniel aggressively lunged at her, resulting in an accidental impalement with the knife. After the incident, she confessed to placing Daniel's lifeless body in the bathtub. When questioned by detectives about her failure to immediately contact emergency services, Loretta provided a disturbing explanation. She revealed that she had left Daniel's body in the bathtub and proceeded to embark on a vacation. Upon her return, she detailed how she relocated his remains into containers. Notably, Loretta admitted to exhuming and carrying these containers with her whenever she moved. The tragic truths surrounding Daniel Burrows was finally unveiled. Loretta faced charges of murder and obstructing her arrest. During the court proceedings, Loretta initially displayed minimal emotion, but as the testimonies unfolded, she broke down and began weeping. The testimonies commenced with Dr. Charles F. Sebert, Jr., a forensic pathologist who had opened the containers. Dr. Charles testified that the containers were enveloped in 9 layers of plastic bags, meticulously arranged in alternating directions. He also observed the presence of dryer sheets, air fresheners, and scented beads, evidently used to mask the scent of decomposition. Upon opening the first container, Dr. Charles discovered a woman's handbag, its color altered by the fluids of decomposition. Inside the bag, he uncovered a cranium, mandible, skull, and jawbone. The second, larger plastic container contained additional skeletal remains, including the left upper arm and lower legs. Upon examining the remains, Dr. Charles observed incisions on the ribs that were consistent with stab wounds. This led him to conclude that the individual had met a violent end, confirming a case of homicide. Following Dr. Charles' testimony, Dr. Stuart Alexander, a forensic odontologist, took the stand and positively identified the remains in the plastic tote as belonging to Daniel Burrows. He compared Burrows' dental records to the teeth found in the skull, providing further evidence of identification. Donna Fontana, a forensic anthropologist from the New Jersey State Police, also provided testimony regarding the condition of the bones within the boxes. To visually demonstrate the state of the bones, Fontana utilized a replica of a human skeleton and accompanying photographs, offering a clear visual aid for the jury. She specifically highlighted the right tibia, a significant bone in the lower leg, which exhibited distinct signs of being cut with a knife and saw. The consistent color of the cut edge with the bone indicated that the cut had occurred around the time of death. Additionally, Fontana observed that several ribs were missing, and those that displayed trauma showed injuries consistent with knife wounds, with one rib being completely fractured. Fontana emphasized that this pattern of dismemberment is often employed to hinder identification and facilitate transportation. On August 3, 2007, Daniel disappeared, with Loretta claiming he had left for a younger woman in a yellow Hummer. However, the prosecution believed that Loretta had orchestrated his murder. In early June 2007, Loretta approached lawyer Enid Heiberg and requested a power of attorney to be drafted, claiming that she and her husband were selling their home while he was away. Grateful for Loretta's kindness, Heiberg agreed to do it for free. Loretta then sought the assistance of Edward Dwyer to notarize the power of attorney, which she signed in her husband's name without his consent. Loretta's daughter, Nicole DiDomizio, witnessed this act of forgery. After Daniel's death, Loretta utilized the fraudulent document to sell their home for $77,000, with half of the proceeds belonging to Daniel. To gain access to the funds, she initiated a divorce in February 2009, alleging that Daniel had relocated to Florida without providing an address. Her divorce lawyer, Daniel Alsofrom, published a notice of the complaint in the Press of Atlantic City. During the divorce proceedings, Loretta received half of the money, with the remaining amount granted upon finalization. The prosecutor highlighted that Loretta acquired nearly $100,000, including the proceeds from the sale of Daniel's house and belongings. In his closing statement, Leavis emphasized that Loretta had evaded justice for over 8 years, leaving behind only Daniel's remains. The The narrative concludes with Loretta becoming $100,000 wealthier and concealing Daniel Burrows in her closet. Following 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Loretta Burrows guilty of first-degree murder for fatally stabbing her husband, dismembering his body with a knife and saw, packing it into 2 plastic containers, and dragging it with her as she relocated 3 times within 6 years. On March 17, 2015, Loretta was convicted and sentenced to 55 years in prison, with an additional 3 years added for hindering apprehension. She will be eligible for parole in 2060 when she reaches 108 years old. After receiving her sentence, Loretta broke down in court and expressed her hope that her actions would bring some form of peace to those who had been harmed. Currently, Loretta is incarcerated at the Etna Mahon Correctional Facility for women in Clinton, New Jersey, where she is expected to remain until her death. Raymond Wantosik experienced a mix of emotions following the conviction of his half-brother's murderer. Raymond had fought for a trial since Daniel's remains were discovered in May of 2013. He wanted the jurors to witness the gruesome evidence of what Loretta had done to Daniel. Raymond stated, "It was my brother who brought justice to this case. He brought justice to himself. His horribly mutilated body won the case." Raymond compared Loretta's actions to those of a butcher slaughtering an animal, emphasizing that Daniel was not an animal but a kind and gentle person who never caused harm to anyone. Loretta's emotional display in court, coupled with her insinuations of abuse by Daniel, were met with skepticism and dismissal from Raymond and other family members. They believed her tears were fake and her claims were false, suggesting that she only cried because she knew she would spend the rest of her life in prison after being caught. Robert Valiant Sr., a friend of Daniel's, expressed this sentiment. Carolyn Burrows, Daniel's sister, was both outraged and bewildered by Loretta's behavior. She revealed that Loretta had attempted to sell Daniel's belongings shortly after his disappearance and had even advised people not to worry about him. Carolyn questioned how Loretta could have kept Daniel hidden in her closet while moving him from house to house. Assistant Atlantic County Prosecutor Kathleen Bond described Loretta's actions as unimaginable, resembling scenes from nightmares and horror movies. Bond highlighted that Loretta not only brutally stabbed her husband to death, but also dismembered his body with a serrated knife, leaving it to decompose for 6 years. At the time of this video's release, there were no updates on the investigation into the death of Loretta's first husband. Daniel Burrows' story serves as a reminder to persistently advocate for what we believe in. The determination and advocacy displayed by Daniel's family, including the creation of a Facebook page and their push for reinvestigation, ultimately led to the uncovering of the truth. This case exemplifies the power of seeking justice and the importance of persistence. Regarding whether justice was served for Daniel Burrows and whether Loretta's sentence was appropriate or if she should have received the death penalty, that is a matter of personal opinion. A young woman vanished from sight after pulling into the school's parking lot to attend a sporting event. Soon, everyone was in for a very unsettling discovery, and the police were called in to investigate. Detectives worked on this eerie mystery for a total of 28 years, and none of them had any idea that this would be the first case of its kind. On June 12, 1975, Sarah Yarborough was born in Portland. Her parents relocated to the town of Federal Way in another state not too long after. It is practically a suburb of Seattle and is located close to it. Along with having 2 brothers, Sarah was very close to her younger brother and assisted her parents in caring for him. Sarah had a background in ballet and music from a young age. The girl always wanted to get into a reputable college, so she worked hard in school. She took part in the school program and flew twice to New Zealand because of her academic performance. Sarah afterwards joined the cheerleading squad at her school. She was a compassionate and non-judgmental individual who tried to assist anyone in need. and she had a large number of friends. When Sarah was 16 years old, her cheerleading squad got together for an event on Saturday morning, December 14, 1991. They were all together at the school building, waiting for the bus to come get them. Sarah was the only one who misjudged the time when she drove to school in her father's car. The bus was not supposed to arrive until 9 in the morning, but she mistakenly believed it would pick them up at 8. Gradually, all of her friends began to show up, but none of them noticed Sarah. When the bus carrying the students arrived, some of the students noticed a car in the parking lot, but the young woman was not there. While her friends found this odd, nobody was able to get in touch with Sarah because none of them had cell phones at the time. 2 boys, aged 12, were strolling around the school premises at approximately the same moment. They saw a strange man as they strolled through the wood area behind the school tennis courts. He emerged from behind some bushes, gave them a strange look, and turned to leave. The kids think he is strange, but they ignored him and continued on. A startling scene was waiting for them a short distance away. A young woman, lifeless and lying on the ground. The school children ran home to tell their parents they thought she had died. The father of one of the boys chose to follow the suspicious man that the kids had spotted, while the parents of the other boy accompanied him to the location. His son informed him that he witnessed a vehicle that appeared to be a Chevrolet Nova leaving that location. His father made the decision to go outside and attempt to locate that car because he lived close to the school. He was able to locate a car that looked similar at one point, but it vanished from his view quickly, making it impossible for him to locate it again. The parents of the other boy arrived at the school in the meantime and saw that the girl on the ground was most likely dead. They hurried to the school building right away and dialed 911. When the police arrived, they were able to confirm that the young lady had passed away. It did not take them long to ascertain that Sarah was the deceased. The officers deduced that the victim had most likely been strangled based on the marks on her neck. There were only a few of her possessions, a jacket, underwear and socks, near the body. Officers suspect that the attacker may have attacked her right next to the car and then dragged her behind the trees because they discovered her purse and car keys inside the vehicle in the school parking lot. After transferring the body to the medical examiners, the police started searching for any hints. Interviewing everyone who was on or close to the school grounds was their initial step. The man that had emerged from behind the bushes close to Sarah's body was roughly described by the 2 guys who discovered her. They described him as a tall man in his early 20s, dressed in black pants, a dark raincoat, and shoulder-length blonde hair. The police soon located another witness, and when they did, they discovered an extremely shocking tale. In the same forested area, a man going for a jog came upon an odd sight. The witness believed that a couple had simply chosen to have some privacy as the young woman lay motionless next to the bushes with a man hovering over her. The man and the young woman were still there when he ran the opposite way down the same road a short while later. He did not feel that he was witnessing a crime being committed in either of the 2 instances. The witness himself told the police that he did not know what behavior was typical in his new country because he had just recently immigrated to the United States from another culture. Still, the witness gave the police a general description of the murderer that matched the kid's story of how the body was found. Several dozen more people who had been in the vicinity of the school were questioned by detectives, but no more pertinent leads were discovered. Meanwhile, doctors examined Sarah's body and determined that her death was caused by strangulation. It appears that the offender used her own underwear, and the young lady's head had sustained a significant injury. Assuming that the victim lost consciousness from this blow, the experts concluded that the story of the runner was true. He noticed that the young lady on the ground remained motionless. Upon examining Sarah's clothing, forensic investigators discovered remnants of the same male DNA on nearly every article. However, in 1991, there was no shared DNA database, so the only method the investigators had was to compare the DNA samples of particular suspects directly. An additional detail was brought to the detective's notice. The medical examiner reported that there were no indications of assault on Sarah's body, despite the fact that forensic scientists discovered male DNA residue on her clothing. After obtaining all of this data, investigators developed their own theories about what transpired. Sarah was the only one in the parking lot when she arrived at the school nearly an hour early. Sarah's attacker most likely saw her there, waited for the girl to exit the vehicle, struck her in the head with an object, and caused her to pass out. After that, he dragged her out of the parking lot and behind the trees, where her body was discovered later. After stripping off some of her clothes and abusing her, the offender strangled the victim with her own stockings. Detectives were disappointed to learn that the driver of the Chevrolet Nova, which they had searched for after one of the children who discovered Sarah's body, had informed them about the vehicle in which the perpetrator had allegedly fled the scene and actually just finished delivering donuts that morning. He gave a sample of his DNA, which did not match what was on Sarah's clothing. Seemingly, the children only noticed the vehicle traveling beside them and assumed the culprit was at the wheel. Alas, none of the boys could remember for certain whether they saw a man coming from the bushes toward any car. Police continued to look for witnesses and fresh leads over the following few days, but they did not make any noteworthy progress. Classes resumed on Monday, despite the fact that everyone was appalled by what had transpired. Not only had the murder occurred a short distance from their school, but the perpetrator was still at large and nobody knew who he was. The male athletes made plans to accompany each student to a vehicle or bus so that they would not be left on the streets, since the young ladies were scared to stroll the premises by themselves. Detectives interviewed each of the roughly 70 possible witnesses they identified that morning in and around the school, but they were unable to obtain any additional information. A rough picture of the murderer was put together and sent to all of the local newspapers and television stations based on the testimony of the two children and the jogger. Numerous media outlets covered the story, and in the weeks that followed, the police received hundreds of tips. Investigators looked into each one, but they all came to a standstill. They once had a tip regarding a man with a criminal past who fit the killer's description. However, there was a setback for the detectives. His DNA did not match that of the offender. The case has been on hold for several months since then. The police attempted to follow up on each of the roughly 4,000 leads they had received in total, but their resources were simply insufficient to handle the volume of data. Time also worked against them, since new cases needed to be looked into every month while investigators looked for the offender. When Sarah's family discovered that the police did not have enough resources to handle all of the tips, her grandfather attempted to assist as much as he could. He was employed by a technology company, and he persuaded management to temporarily donate a $100,000 computer with extreme processing power to the police department. Even though it was an enormous amount in the 1990s, management approved of it. Police officers could process leads more quickly, sort them into an easy-to-read format, and store all the information about the leads in one location with this computer. In spite of everything, they were unable to follow any lead, and in the years that followed, they made no progress. Sarah's classmates graduated 2 years later, and before they did, they decided to honor their friend. They were able to raise a substantial amount of money, which they used to build a memorial. It was a bench with metal castings of Sarah's belongings on it. A picture of the young woman's dog reaching for her purse was placed next to these items. The case was repeatedly reopened in the years that followed, and all the evidence was once again examined, but the outcome remained the same. They still had not been able to apprehend the offender. The police conducted thousands of interviews and collected DNA samples from almost 300 potential suspects during this time, but their findings were all ambiguous. 20 years after the murder in 2011, the new detective made the decision to use contemporary technology. He was made aware of a business that started doing genetic genealogy research. When the policeman asked if they could try to find the relatives of the person whose DNA was found on the victim's body, the experts took up the task. Sadly, they were unsuccessful. First of all, in 2011, genetic genealogy was only beginning to gain popularity, and the experts' knowledge was quite restricted. For instance, they do not know how to look for both male and female relatives in the same sample. They could only search for family ties with other men if they shared a man's DNA, and vice versa. Second, a number of laws that forbade the use of genetic data samples to find relatives of suspects presented them with yet another challenge. It did, however, bore some interesting fruit. Firstly, the group of scientists that the investigator had contacted had already spent a number of years assembling a genetic genealogy of the original settlers who arrived in America in 1620 from Great Britain aboard the Mayflower. They learned that the assassin of Sarah was related to Robert Fuller, a passenger on the ship, through analyzing his DNA. But it was nearly impossible to track him down in this chain, particularly during those years. Although there were only a little more than 100 passengers on the ship, more than 25 million people have descended from them over the ages. Second, the detectives were unaware that he had made the Sarah Yarborough case the first of its kind. Although his idea was not successful, it was the first crime that was attempted to be solved using genetic genealogy. Using what information he could find, the detective located multiple men living in the town's vicinity at the time of Sarah's murder who shared the Fuller surname. He found pictures of them and went up to the two men who found the body when they were kids and the jogger who was one of the witnesses. Sadly, neither of them was able to identify the murderer in the picture. At last, the investigators requested DNA samples from every Fuller in the vicinity, which they then sent to a lab. Even though none of them matched the murderer's DNA, an intriguing thing happened in this case. In fact, one of those men was a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from that very ship, as the experts proved. He was undoubtedly not the murderer, though, and he was also unaware that any distant relatives resided nearby. He might have been related to the offender so distantly that their family was unaware of the relationship. In 2017, the detective retired, and a new team took up the case. Investigators returned to the company that had taken the killer's DNA sample in 2011. By then, genetic material analysis had progressed significantly, and specialists decided to attempt determining the offender's ancestry. It took 2 entire years. The experts manually attempted to trace the killer's family ties and get in touch with people who were living in Federal Way at the time of Sarah's death by searching through public databases for even the most distant relatives of the murderer. Ultimately, they had to eliminate thousands of candidates before they struck it lucky. Experts concluded that there was a good chance the DNA sample from Sarah's clothing belonged to one of the two brothers. One was 33 years old and the other was 27 at the time of the murder. The older one proved to be a felon with a noteworthy criminal history. Since his DNA sample was in the FBI database and he had served time in prison for violent crimes, it was evident that he was not involved in Sarah's murder. If he had been, his DNA would have matched evidence from the 1990s. Regarding Patrick Nicholas, the younger brother, the police had him under suspicion for violent crimes, including crimes against minors, but that was before the criminal's DNA samples were entered into the database. Detectives set up a surveillance system for the man right away. He was 55 years old and lived in Wellington, a nearby town. After 2 days of the police observing everything he did, the chance finally arrived. After going to the laundry, Patrick went outside to smoke and threw his cigarette butt on the ground while he waited for his clothes to be washed. Without delay, a police officer placed it in an evidence bag and went back to his vehicle. The second time Patrick went outside to smoke, a red handkerchief fell out of his pocket. The man did not pick it up and returned to the laundry room. The police were happy to collect the second piece of evidence in case the experts could not obtain a sample of DNA from the butt of the cigarette. But the specialists were able to take samples from each of these things with ease, and the following day they gave the detective the much-awaited update. The DNA of Patrick and the DNA discovered on Sarah's clothing in 1991 matched exactly. The man was taken into custody by the police after the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant for him. From the time investigators learned his name to the formal filing of murder charges, it all took 5 days. Many asked the very reasonable question, why was a man with such a criminal history not even considered a suspect for all those 28 years? After his biography was leaked to the media, Patrick Nicholas, then 19 years old, tried to assault a young woman after approaching her and getting into her car. The victim was able to get away, but not before having to jump into the river and swim a considerable distance to get away from the attacker safely. After serving 4 years in jail, Patrick was allowed to leave. In 1994, he attempted to abuse a young woman who was underage, which led to his next arrest by the police. Although he was arrested once more, no database had his DNA on file. That has a peculiar explanation. The article for which he was prosecuted was not difficult enough to obtain DNA, and the police never came across his name in 3 decades. Additionally, he was absent from all 4,000 leads that were gathered over time. It also revealed the reason why specialists in genetic genealogy were unable to link them to Robert Fuller. As it turned out, Patrick's biological grandfather was raised under the adopter family name after being adopted. One of the men who found Sarah's body when they were kids in 1991 declared right away that Patrick was the murderer. He acknowledged that the experience had left a lasting impression on him. When the body was found, he was just 12 years old, and the murderer had seen his face. The witness had been living in constant fear that Patrick would kill him for years, and he did not feel safe until Patrick's arrest. The trial for Patrick did not start until 2023. He maintained his innocence, and his attorney attempted to refute the primary piece of evidence, the DNA test. He believed that the fact that Patrick's sperm was found on the young woman's cloth did not establish his guilt, but this argument was rejected. The attorney also attempted to dispute the validity of the DNA analysis itself, but the experts ruled that these arguments were wholly unfounded. Ultimately, Patrick was determined to have committed first-degree murder without intending to kill. He was essentially given no chance of ever being released from prison when he was sentenced to 45 years and 8 months on May 25. Patrick was unmoved at the pronouncement of the sentence. Sarah's relatives also addressed the judge, thanking everyone involved in the trial and the investigators for bringing the killer to justice after he had evaded justice for 28 years.